Starlet. So this is the second video in the Ancestral Inheritance series, mini-series, duo. And this one is about blessings. And this was inspired from a quote by this book, which I've been referencing quite a bit. It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wallen. This one. Sexy face. You're welcome. And this was my shadow workbook for the month. I'm still working through it, so it's going to be longer than a month. But I was really interested in the concept of inherited trauma response, and so on and so forth. And so this quote is on page 23 to 24 of the book. And I'm going to read you the quote because I think it's really interesting to take a positive look at the things that we can inherit as well, which are often not examined for some reason. Like the spiritual healing aspect is often looked at in terms of wounding, which we've done. It's important, so let's do it. It's important. But also it is important to acknowledge the balance. It's that word again, Joey's word du jour, balance. According to Rachel Yehuda, the purpose of an epigenic change is to expand the range of ways we respond in stressful situations, which she says is a positive thing. Who would you rather be in a war zone with, she asks. Someone that's had previous adversity and knows how to defend themselves, or someone that has never had to fight for anything? Once we understand what biological changes from stress and trauma are meant to do, she says, we can develop a better way of explaining to ourselves what our true capabilities and potentials are. Viewed in this way, the traumas we inherit or experience firsthand can not only create a legacy of distress, but also forge a legacy of strength and resilience that can be felt for generations to come. And I'm just going to repeat that last bit because I think it's very important. Forge a legacy of strength and resilience that can be felt for generations to come. This, to me, is Morrigan and Babe's hand, well, same shape-shifting, but their energy together and not separate, or separate, who knows, it's the Morrigan. Their energy together reaching out down the ancestral line. And there is this thing that is said about the Morrigan, that once she claims you, she may come back for you in different lifetimes. I don't know how true that is to me, and I've always kind of dismissed it a little bit. I'm not saying that she would not, as she might well, especially if she's not done with you. But for me, the different incarnations, the point, the reason of that is to experience all of the lessons possible. Experience as much as you can. And that's why I got into multiverse and parallel lifetimes and the different cycles and different tendrils of existence, pulling information down into the nexus of the soul in the podcast and in other videos too, because Joey will keep harping on about it because she was like brain explode when she came to this conclusion of hers. I'm talking about myself in the third person. It's super scientific. Did you enjoy it? But it made me, but because I think if we're meant to experience different lifetimes, different experiences, that sort of creates a well-rounded soul experience of this planet, of this incarnation, right? So our soul gains as much information as possible and constantly coming back under the same goddess. Even a goddess as multifaceted as the Morrigan feels to me like that would hinder a soul's complete experience. It depends how you see the divinity. If you all see it as different shades of the same thing, then it might not occur to you as such. But I feel like the different ways in which we experience different spiritual paths and different religions will have an impact on us and our soul's learning across all of those lifetimes. So all that different information, all that different spiritual sensory information being downloaded through different tendrils means to me that being aligned with different spiritual entities makes more sense. And maybe a reason why the people who can channel very easily, like moi, may have many experiences with many different spiritual entities, which might be why some of it is like a natural part of the soul, because the soul remembers, the soul recognizes, the soul reaches out, and that memory and that history already exists within the soul nexus. So that to me might be a part of why channeling is so readily available to certain people. It is to me, and why other people might not have as easy a time with it, because their soul is quote unquote younger or has less incarnations under its belt, and so it finds it a little bit more complicated because it doesn't already have that repertoire, if you like, with different spiritual entities. Just a thought. Back to this though. So the idea that the energy of the Morrigan then sort of stretches out from this because of the idea of forging a legacy of strength and resilience that can be felt for generations to come. And there's so much happening here. Firstly, there's a paradigm shift. There's like a perspective shift from the things that we inherit in terms of trauma, instead turning that into an alchemization of that. Now, here on my channel on YouTube, we've talked about this for a very long time. And it's a sort of an extension of a concept which I've always believed in, which is that we forge ourselves through the fires of our difficulties. We come through the other side of our trauma, and we go from a kind of victim mindset to a survivor mindset, and then we have to try and alchemize that into a thriver mindset. And if we can forge that legacy within our own energy, within our own entity of strength and resilience, a refusal to lie down, a refusal to die, a refusal to give up, to get that sort of resilient, raw hope with teeth that I've talked about many times into the essence of our being, we then pass that along through the spiritual ecosystem and through our biological line, depending on if we decide to have biological children or not, or if we have adopted children, or if we have those that we, it's not the same as having children, but those that we impact from the ripples of our existence in this very profound way, those that we share our stories with, those that we share our lessons with, those that we might teach, those that we might teach and learn from, because it's not usually just a one-way street, it's a entanglement of connections through the ecosystem, all of the roots combining and all over the place. So even if it's not biological destiny, it can be kind of an inherited destiny through the ecosystem, through the tangible ecosystem and through the spiritual ecosystem. So the more that we resonate that strength and resilience within ourselves from overcoming it, the more that we can pass that along to others, whether they're related or not. And that is a profound and reassuring, honestly, idea of legacy, that the more that we know we have overcome, the more that we can pass on the ability to overcome to those in the future. And that is a cornerstone of hope, that we will keep building on what we have overcome, what we have survived, so that our children will be more resilient. And I'm going to use children in the very liberal sense, as the younger generation, not necessarily biological, in that. And I think there is evidence of that as you see the younger generations coming up and rebelling, and the massive differences between generations. And people make jokes about it, and people are just gross about it, actually, with like boomers versus millennials versus this versus that, and people get, it's foul. I really don't like those labels, but you can see that the younger generation always carry within them a spirit of rebellion, always, against the old and outmoded. It is kind of a natural inclination, and some people are like, well, it's the inclination of the young because they've got less to lose, blah blah blah, and it kind of, and they've not had it worn out of them. Now, that's not to say that everybody gets it worn down out of them. That's not true. I mean, most people in my generation, as they've grown older, it's not dissipated at all. And I anticipate that element of rebelling against the abuses in the society will keep going. We'll keep fighting the good fight for things that matter, equality. And of course, just as a side note, this is more of an inherited trauma and wound space, but of course there are those who try to cling to power in any way that they can, the outmoded modalities. What's happened in Poland over the last few days, as of when this went up, which will be the 26th of October 2020, depending on when you're watching it, it's horrifying. It's basically sending women back to the Dark Ages. And so there is elements that will try and resist change. That's always the truth, and cling on to power by trying to dominate others. So if we are inheriting the strength and resilience of those that have gone before, and we pass on our strength and resilience, it makes it all the more important to honor our victories, to honor the ways that we have overcome, and to share those stories. I said in the other video about the importance of storytelling and how that impacts on us as people, as human beings, across society, across generations, not just in family units. So the more that we share our stories of strength, resilience, survival, and overcoming, the more entrenched in our inner story, but also our eco stories, that becomes. And so the more that we honor that and refuse to forget, because forgetting is how we get into situations where people forget the difficulty, and then they sort of gloss over the past, and then they get into bypassing and things of that nature. Then they start justifying these horrible power trips like we talked about. But the more that we honor those stories, those good resilient stories, the more that gets passed along, and the betterment, hopefully, of humankind and the planet and all spirits under the spiritual ecosystem will continue to grow. And I think that is a powerful message, and something worth bearing in mind as we move into Samhain, which is prime time storytelling, prime time ghost storytelling. What is ghost stories but spirit stories by another name? It is the fear of the unknown, but they usually have lessons in. They usually have a hint of history. They usually have a sprinkling of morality. It's interesting the way that stories can become so pivotal to moments. And definitely in the Samhain Halloween crossover, there is definitely that crossroads of energy that allows these stories to perpetuate. And horror is always a very interesting vehicle for human fear, because it's just shadow given form, given life, and reflected back at us through the medium of storytelling, howsoever we experience that storytelling. Usually, though, even in those stories, there's a survivor, there's a thriver, there's someone who overcomes, and that is usually the focus. Unless you get into gross storytelling, and in which case, some of them, like the oh, sorry, honey. Sorry, honey. Sorry, she didn't like the clicking. Daisy didn't like the clicking. She's asleep. She's making those noises. Goodness. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Sorry. I was trying to remind myself. Basically, the torture porn shit is just foul in my mind. There's just no need for it. But there you go. Not my cup of tea, storytelling. La la la. So, if we take this, if we take this energy of overcoming, of knowing that we come from a long line of survivors turned thrivers, then that can help us to shift our perception, our perspective into something else. And by the way, guys, I know that I don't edit out the silliness in this. I don't edit out me talking to Daisy all of a sudden. I don't make it super profesh. But I feel like that's a part of my story. And so I don't really want to edit out all of the funny bits or the silly bits or the me losing my way bits, because it's human. And that's kind of the point. It is human to experience. It is human to cry. It's human to laugh. It's humans to struggle and overcome. And in that struggle and overcoming, we can define ourselves again and again and again. Who you are is not stagnant. Who you are doesn't have to be who you were. You can change. You can challenge who you were. You can grow. You can learn. You can reinvent yourself if you need to. Starting from the ground up, from roots up, like doing the healing work, doing the shadow work, doing what needs to be done to overcome those negative patterns, and shifting it into a thriver mindset, a resilient mindset, a hopeful mindset. And I think that is super powerful and super worth doing, and something worth considering at Samhain. Maybe telling yourself the stories that you have lived through the eyes of somebody who is incredibly impressed with your resilience. So the way that you look at the stories of yourself slowly begins to change. And you can see it through the eyes of the generations that will follow you, biological or not, who will hear your stories and see your fire and feel that they can resonate with that and overcome their own. So that's it, guys, for this one. Many blessings, and I will talk to you very soon.